Well, thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, it's fitting on this, the end of the first sitting week of marking the anniversary of the election of this Prime Minister. We have further confirmation, if we needed it, of the shambles at the heart of economic policy making in this government. But the Treasurer and the Prime Minister have had two signature policies over their 12 months. Two signature policies with which they went to the election. Superannuation tax changes and a cut in company tax. That's their big economic agenda. That was the centrepiece of their budget and the centrepiece of their re-election campaign. And today, Mr. Speaker, it's take out the trash day. It's garbage day in Canberra because those policies hit the wall. The Prime Minister's asked just last week, what are your great achievements? What are your greatest achievements in your first year in office? And the Prime Minister had an answer, all ready to go. He said superannuation taxes and business tax. He said, well, what achievements they are and how well has it gone. Let's deal with superannuation first, Mr. Speaker. Let's talk about economic leadership. The failure of economic leadership provided by that side of the House and the economic leadership that's been provided by the Leader of the Opposition and this side of the House. The Opposition released a superannuation taxation policy in April 2015. The Prime Minister was claiming, even at question time, that it didn't exist. It was announced in April 2015, and the government has had multiple positions on this. At first they said this is outrageous, nobody should ever touch superannuation taxes, the member for Cook, then the Minister for Social Services said. He promised they would never increase tax on superannuation. That was an outrageous attack on retirement incomes, said the now Treasurer. Then, of course, he became Treasurer, stood at that dispatch box and announced superannuation tax increases which were ill thought out and based on no consultation. And now, today, that has come crashing down as he has dropped the most egregious measure. Isn't it interesting? We had a press conference earlier today. I thought, well, the Prime Minister, this is a serious announcement. Clearly the Prime Minister will be at this press conference, not to be seen, because he might have been asked why he said before the election, when asked, are there any circumstances at all after the election that this could change? He said, no, this is absolutely ironclad. So no, the Prime Minister was in his office, perhaps hiding under the doona while the press conference was on, hoping that it all went okay. But it's not just about from before the election to now that the government has not been able to keep a consistent position. Over the course of a week or two, their position has changed. Our old friend, the Minister for Revenue, said in response to the Leader of the Opposition and I, when we released a proposal to the government to say we will help you fix your problems, don't do the retrospective measure and drop the other spending measures, including the mature workers measure, the Minister for Revenue was outraged at this proposal. She said that it was going to disadvantage older Australians. And she asked the question, why is Bill Shorten attacking aspirational Australians, people who work hard and want to get ahead and save for their retirement? And then the Treasurer said, this is a 1970s approach that shows Bill Shorten stuck in the 1970s. He said, they announced a policy a few hours ago, exactly the same policy as they were condemning. They can't hold a line over a period of a couple of weeks. They condemn themselves by their own words. But I have a personal favourite, Mr Deputy Speaker. It happened today. It's my personal favourite. The Treasurer and the Minister for Revenue were up there announcing they were dropping the older workers measure as part of their package. The Minister for Revenue was asked, and she said, oh, we're very committed to the measure. We're very committed. She was abolishing it during that press conference. I'd hate to see it if they weren't committed to the measure, Mr Speaker. It wouldn't stand a chance. Measures they're very committed to hit the wall. If they're not really committed, I don't know what happens to them. And then we've got corporate tax. Remember the $50 billion ramrod on the budget that the Prime Minister was so proud about? It was the centrepiece of his budget. Remember, we probed the economic growth impacts and we were told, well, it's going to increase the economy by 1%, a full percent, we were told, over 10 years, from 10 years' time. So in 20 years' time, the corporate tax cut would deliver a 1% increase to our economy in 20 years' time. That was with the full suite of measures. Now we're told, well, they're going to get the $10 million, or a tax cut through for businesses under a $10 million turnover, but after that they'll struggle. Well, I wonder what dividend that provides for economic growth in Australia. If the full measure provided 1% in 20 years' time, I wonder what this half-baked measure was. And we're told that, oh, well, we'd love to do it, we just can't get the numbers in the Senate, we're told. It's all too hard. It's very hard in the Senate. The Labor Party hasn't had a majority in the Senate for one day since 1949. We've managed to do a few things over the years: Medicare, superannuation, the greatest economic reforms of the 80s and 90s, not with a majority in the Senate. This Prime Minister says, oh, it's a bit hard. I can't get the numbers in the Senate. That's the economic leadership he's provided. So we've got the greatest hits of this government. From the Prime Minister, the Treasurer, the Minister for Revenue, we've got the greatest hits over this last year. The Prime Minister said he was going to be a new type of economic leader. He was going to have a mature conversation with the Australian people about such measures as increasing the GST and broadening the base of the GST. And we said, well, we won't be in that because 60% of the revenue raised would need to be used to compensate low-income earners if you're to be fair, and there'll be no economic growth dividend. And the government, the Prime Minister and the Treasurer said we were being backward and we weren't being constructive. And then, lo and behold, the Treasurer gets up in that famous 47-minute address to the National Press Club and says, oh, we've decided not to do this because 60% of the revenue would be required to compensate low-income earners, he said, and there's no economic growth dividend. Well, that's economic leadership Morrison-Turnbull style. And then, of course, we had the Prime Minister thinking, well, economic reform now is about the Federation. So we had the Penrith oration. Mr. Speaker, the Penrith oration. The member from Lindsay, unfortunately, is no longer with us, but the Penrith oration at a very similar location to the former Prime Minister, promising no cuts to health and education before the 2013 election. The Prime Minister came out and said he knows the answer. You can't increase the GST, so we'll have double taxation. We'll let the states increase tax as well, and we'll withdraw all investment in public education. The Penrith oration lasted 48 hours. 48 hours. That's economic leadership. Then we've got the greatest hits of the Treasurer, of course. He stood at the dispatch box yesterday and said it's outrageous. The Labor Party wants to reform negative gearing. They're going to crash housing prices, forgetting that he said to the Cabinet that negative gearing should be reformed. I've got to say, though, it's one thing to be rolled by Peter Dutton. It's completely another thing to be rolled by George Christensen, Mr. Speaker. You've got to draw the line somewhere. Can you imagine Paul Keating or Peter Costello saying, oh, well, George wouldn't let me do it, Mr. Speaker. I got rolled by the member for Dawson. That's what this Treasurer has been reduced to. Rolled in the Cabinet, rolled in the caucus. And, of course, we've got the Treasurer who will argue anything. He reminds us, some honourable members might have been in the debating team at school. Some of our children are in the debating team now. You go home and you say, well, what side of the argument were you on in the debate today? And they say, well, we tossed the coin and we're arguing the affirmative. That's what this Treasurer does. He goes in the Cabinet and says, George, what side of the argument am I on today? Can we have the coin toss? And he'll argue anything. He's an advocate for any cause you like, even if it's inconsistent, totally inconsistent with what has been argued in before. So we don't know really what's going on the other side. I do have a theory, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We know what this government does with failed treasurers. We know where they go. So I wonder whether there's been any polite inquiries made to the Minister for Foreign Affairs over recent days. What diplomatic postings are coming up? Where could I go, says the member for Cook. Is London available maybe soon? Alex is coming home. London to be nice. Paris perhaps. So that's what we have from the Treasurer. And of course then we've got the sidekick, the Minister for Revenue, who argued that negative gearing would force housing prices up when the Prime Minister and Treasurer are arguing that forced them down. So that was her great contribution to the economic debate in Australia. So we've got to check. But what's the scare campaign today? It's a simple thing for a junior minister. What's the scare campaign today? We're saying they're going to force prices up or down, and she forgot to do that. So there is a better way, Mr. Deputy Speaker. There is a better way, and that is to provide economic leadership by seeking a mandate for reform, as the Leader of the Opposition did and the Opposition did, seeking a mandate for important changes like negative gearing reform and capital gains tax reform, and cracking down on vet fee help rorts, and dealing with private health insurance, and actually providing an alternative vision. Well, this side's up for it. The Leader of the Opposition's up for it. The Treasurer and the Finance Minister and the Minister for Revenue should make way for a team that's ready to govern. And I've got to tell you, it's not the member for Dawson, despite appearances today. It's this side of the House. It's this side of the House which has an alternative vision. This side of the House which has done the hard work when it comes to policy development. It's this side of the House which will carry through on its commitments. This side of the House which will make sure that what we go to an election with is what we implement, as we did. You've got this Prime Minister who says, I give an ironclad commitment that we will not change superannuation and didn't even have the courage to turn up to the press conference where the humiliating capitulation was announced, where the humiliating surrender to the hard right of the Liberal Party and the National Party was announced. Well, this is a Prime Minister who, it has been said quite accurately, may be in office, but he's not in power.